Oh, I've seen it. Oh, did you? Oh, thank you.
You ready, Amy? Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Housing Trust Fund. Kermit the Frog here. Hopefully Francis out in the hallway can hear this, and so everything will work smoothly, and we're glad Francis, our new AmeriCorps Vista, is here. There's a 20-second delay, so we'll have to give her a little time to actually see. I'm sorry? Yeah, we can. Well, this mic isn't hooked up to the system. So we just need to make sure people talk loud. Is it? Oh, yeah. Eric? Yeah, talk loud. What do you want me to say? That's all you need to say, my son. You don't need to say anything in particular. You just need to pass. You have to talk slow. Yep. We hope you can hear us online. Nope, you're good. Come on in.
Say something and pass it to her.
Say something and pass it to her.
Say something and pass it to her.
Say something and there's no one to pass it to.
I had never agreed to this. Thanks, Ruby. Thanks. You rock, buddy.
Perfect. Perfect. You have a copy of the question? If not, there's one right behind.
Yep, I think we got them there. I think they're good, right?
So we'll ask the question. Ask mine if I'm-
And then when we're done with all of them, we'll see if there's any questions from the virtual community. Got it.
Good morning, everyone. May I have your attention, please? I just wanted to say welcome to the State Housing Trust Fund Summit, and we hope you enjoy this morning, the day's events and the information that is provided. For those of you watching on the live stream, welcome as well. If you have questions, we will be answering the live stream questions at the end of the panel. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our MC for the day, the one and only President Dr. Joe Schaefer.
Thank you, Dan. Good morning, everyone. Good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That was fantastic. So it's really a pleasure to be here and to be part of the really exciting events we talk about Housing Trust Fund and the concepts and the potential for the future of our community. I like to tell people in education, we're realizing that people, talent are really going to be the thing that defines the success of a community, of a family, of a region, of a state. And more what we're finding is there are extreme pressures on those people, housing being one of the biggest ones. And so what used to be considered perhaps a more social issue is now becoming a social issue, an economic issue, and really a major community issue. So I really want to applaud the folks that are helping pull this conversation together. Specifically, I would like to thank My Front Door for this, and Habitat for Humanity for hosting the events, as well as our sponsors, Thrivent Financial, Burns Insurance, the Office Bar and Grill, Minuteman Press, Miller Promotions, and Miller Promotions. So can we give a round of applause for those people, please? And now it's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished mayor, the Honorable Mayor of Cheyenne, Patrick Collins. Patrick.
Well, first of all, I just want to say good morning to everyone and welcome you to our statewide Housing Trust Fund Summit. You know, when I got to be mayor, one of the things I've really enjoyed most about this job is the chance to get out to meet different people from different places. And when it came to housing, it was really my thought that housing was a problem in our larger cities. But as I've gotten out, I've learned that that's not in fact true. That Shoshone and Pine Bluffs and Upton have the same problem Casper and Cheyenne does, and that is there's no housing available. And so I'm excited about the opportunity today to have this summit and to understand and to be educated on what's going on and maybe some of the best practices that we can have as we move forward. Dr. Schaefer said something that I think is real important, and that is housing is obviously a humanitarian crisis. People need a place to live, but now I believe it's really starting to affect our economy. We've had employees who wanted to come to Cheyenne and take jobs, and they got here and they loved our community. It's beautiful. They loved everything about it, but they couldn't find a place to live, and they chose to go home to Iowa and to Wisconsin and cold places like that. And so, it's a problem. And so the other part of it that starts to make me real nervous is with our economy and what's going on, inflation, supply chain shortages. The people at the lowest level of our economic ladder are finding housing to become unaffordable. And so I think that's a real big challenge for us and something that I'm looking forward to seeing solutions here today. And so that's why I think today is so important. The Corporations Committee of our legislature has decided to take on housing as an interim topic. And I think that this is a really unique opportunity for us to, And so today, I think it's a great opportunity for us to see what a trust fund might be able to do to help solve some of our housing problems. But what I hope we come away with today is we're educated on some of these issues so that we can go out and we can advocate for housing, both at the local level and also the state and federal levels. And so I think today is going to be a great day. I want to say thank you to the folks sitting up here that sponsored this event. They see the need and the opportunity, and I know these guys are dedicated to fixing our housing problems and and helping make Cheyenne the kind of place and our state the kind of place that people have a safe and affordable place to live. And so anyways, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thanks for your work across the state to make housing available. And I look forward to being educated today and advocating for our future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. How about another round of applause for our fantastic mayor, Patrick Collins? I tell you what, Mr. Mayor, I have a hard time following you in anything that you do. You are engaged with the community, helping the community, appreciate the message every week in the paper, and you seem to be everywhere. So thank you for your leadership and thank you for all you're doing. So we've got a great opportunity to kick off the summit with our first panel, the nonprofit housing panel. And I want to take a quick minute to introduce those members of the panel. And then we've got a series of questions that we're going to ask each of them. As Dan said, we'll go through and every panelist will have an opportunity to respond to the questions. We'll move through. When we're done with all of the questions, then we'll turn to our virtual community who is joining us out there and see if there's any questions that they would like to ask of the panel as well. And so with that, I'd like to jump right in. I'd start out with introductions and start out with Kumia, Robin Bocanegra, close, good, who's the executive director. Community Action of Laramie County, Eric Walsh, the program director. Unaccompanied Student Initiative. Morning, Patrick. Come in. Is Austin here? Austin didn't make it. Okay. Volunteers of America, Michelle Bird. And is Bonnie here as well? Bonnie's not here. Okay. Family Promise, Misty Saxon, Executive Director. Safe House, Carla Thurin. And then Habitat for Humanity, Dan Dorsch. And then, of course, the one and the only Brenda Burkle, the Executive Director for My Front Door. How about a round of applause welcoming our panelists? All right, so now I'm going to go with questions. I am going to ask the panelists to help me pass the microphone back and forth, and we're going to do this gracefully, I think. You may, I may not. We'll see. So I'd like to start off, we'll start to our far left, and why don't you start off by saying, you tell us who you are, what AMI do you serve, and how do you impact our community?
Good morning. Is that- It is? Okay, just can't hear it. I'm Robin with the Camilla Shelter, and Camilla is the local homeless shelter serving single men, women, and then families with children. We've been in the community. This is our 40th year. So we do serve, like I said, men, women, and families. You can't hear me. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that. That's why I'm not hearing anything. Thank you. Obviously, I'm not a technical person. So Camilla Shelter, we serve single men and women, families with children. We don't really, I guess the only population we don't serve is unaccompanied youth.
Okay, my name is Eric Walsh. I'm the director for Community Action Laramie County Self-Sufficiency in the Kinship and VA Housing Program. We serve kind of a plethora of different populations there. Our self-sufficiency program with our SRO and family housing, we serve those below the 50% AMI. And those programs are basically taking those who are homeless or becoming homeless and getting them into our transitional housing, where they get case management services from our case managers to try and get into permanent housing. We also have our Project Hope program. Project Hope is essentially the same thing, except there's a little financial assistance with that. And that one actually falls under the 200% poverty guideline. With that, they get intensive case management, and the end goal is getting into permanent housing. And when I say we help them with some financial assistance, we help them with deposit and rent to get into permanent housing and try and take those barriers away that they have to get in to become self-sufficient. We also have our VA program. It is funded by the Grant Per Diem program through the VA. We serve veterans who are homeless. They come in and stay in our 90-day program, and we connect to different community organizations like Volunteers of America or the HUD-VASH system to try and get them into permanent housing as well. That one, we really don't have a financial aspect of where they fall under. It's usually what they would fall under with VOA or HUD-VASH. And even then, it's a kind of a case-by-case thing. Right now, we are currently helping the application and assistance with the ERAT program, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, which is funded through the DFS. We have 3 case managers that work on that. And those, I believe, also fall under the 80% AMI right now. We don't really do much of the funding. We do some motel stay assistance and all that, but most of the funding comes from DFS, and we just are helping them apply for it. Our kinship program, those are those who work with the older folks that are raising grandparents or grandparents raising grandchildren or other relatives. We help with that by giving them a monthly respite care, help them with guardianship, try and connect them with resources, just to make it a little bit easier on them when they're in our program. Within kinship, though, we also have developed or came up with our program, our WISE program. That's a homemaking services for those that are in trying to keep them out of how do you say the I had the word on top of my head. We're basically trying to keep them in their homes, and we're doing light work like housekeeping, shopping, and stuff like that. And then giving them actually an actual ear to listen as well. Then both programs also see the eyeglass and voucher program as well. The kinship does the kids vouchers, and the self-sufficiency does the adult eyeglasses. And then one of our main ones that serve the homeless population is our Crossroads Healthcare Clinic. It's a federally qualified healthcare center, and it provides primary medical care, mental health services, and substance abuse services to individuals and families who are currently homeless, and a small percentage of low income. We also have the mobile clinic that goes out to Camilla about 3 times a week, and serves the homeless population there as well.
I'm Michelle Bird. I am a Veteran Services Coordinator at Volunteers of America. My program is Housing First. So, you know, we get veterans in that don't have housing, they don't have jobs. And so we try to house them first before we help them get jobs. We have 3 levels of our program. So they can be with me and for as long as our funding will allow. And then we have a shallow subsidies program, which is 2 years, but they have to be able to pay 50% of their rent. And then after that, they go to our GPD program, where our GPD coordinator will just follow up with them and make sure that they're okay and see what they need. And, you know, if there's any additional supports that we can offer them. We also work with Camilla. We often send folks to the shelter if they are not living in a safe place until we can get them housing. We also work with Eric at Calc to get our folks on their GPD list until we can get them into somewhere else. We put our veterans in EHA. We have a couple of hotels that work with us often. And I just lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry. But we try to work with the community to just make sure our veterans are housed first.
Hi, I'm Misty Saxon with Family Promise of Cheyenne. Our program is to help minor children and their families either experiencing homelessness or preventing them from becoming homelessness. Our shelter is more of a program and you get a place to stay and meals while you complete our program to get back on your feet. We also do the rental assistance, and just recently we've gotten Google programming where we can offer some technical trainings to our clients and others to help them get a step up and a better paying job. Obviously we're low to no income is our.
Good morning. I'm Carla Tureen from Safe House Services. We provide services to victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, elder abuse, dating violence, and stalking, and any kind of intimate partner violence. We have a shelter that has between around 50 to 60 beds in it, just depends on how we arrange them. And for the last several months, we've been at 40 plus in our shelter every night. Everything we do and everything we provide to the victims of these violence acts is free. We don't charge anybody anything. And once a person hits our door and they're sleeping in our shelter, they're considered homeless. They are, whether they have a job or they don't, they're considered homeless. And so we serve them as that. We provide food, transportation, anything we can do to help get them back on their feet. We provide a lot of empowerment classes within our shelter. The one most popular is a financial empowerment class that we offer. And we actually got an all-state grant for that, so we can give them gift cards for attending the class. So they attend a little better when they're going to get a gift at the end of the class. But everything we do is throughout the county. We provide services throughout entire Laramie County. We respond to the hospital, to law enforcement, and to anybody who calls, and we have walk-ins. We also provide services for victims seeking protection orders or stalking orders, sexual assault orders. We go to court with them and we go through that process. So we're a hand right next to them to make sure that they're safe. So the reason I'm here today is because when those people hit our door and come into our facility, it is horrific to try to figure out where their next step is going to be, where they're going to go, where they're going to sleep after they're done at the shelter and when they're moving on. So I appreciate everybody here.
Good morning, Dan Dorsch, Habitat for Humanity of Laramie County. We have several programs that serve families and individuals whose AMI is 0 to 80%. Our main program is our construction program, where we use volunteers and the support of the community to build a home for a family, where they receive a 0% 30-year mortgage to make that home affordable and safe for their families. Our repair programs helps people stay safely and age in place in their homes by getting repairs done for them at a very low cost. An extension of that, in October of last year, we became a subrecipient for the ERAP Home Stability Services Program, where we facilitate home repairs and home modifications for people in mobile homes as well. We are a Veterans Build affiliate. That means every year we have to either build a home for a veteran or do some type of event to support our veterans communities. And lastly, our newest program is the Fresh Start Fund, which many of the panelists here today are partners with us in that program. The Fresh Start program allows individuals and other partner nonprofits who transition out of their program into new apartments or housing. It allows them to shop for free through a voucher program at our Restore for free. So they feel a new start in a new apartment and help them get their new life going. And would just like to say thank you to the Caring Foundation at the Blue Cross Blue Shield for their support in facilitating the creation of that fund. And that is all. Thank you.
So My Front Door is a program that is a 7-year, 3-phase core program model. We begin with financial literacy, move to homeownership preparedness, and then finally we spend 5 years with families after they purchase a home to ensure they're successful. And we start making that permanent transition to the middle class by taking those who are beginning the program, kind of doing that poverty shuffle, and then transitioning them all the way through managing a long-term asset like a home and being able to understand how to use that equity. We serve families with children between 50 to 80% of area median income. To date, we have helped 57 families become homeowners. 56 have been successful over that long term, and we will have another homeowner on Monday in Albany County. We serve Laramie and Cheyenne, and I am completely in awe of all of the program partners sitting here. If you look, beginning with Robin and kind of come down the table, this represents your housing continuum. Each one of us kind of attacks that piece on the housing continuum and how we move people from poverty to the middle class. And each of us at one point or another has fed kind of through each other's programs. And we're very excited to see what a housing trust fund could do to support the leveraging of resources and programs and talent.
Well, I would say it would help us in a number of ways. From what I understand, we would be able to create more transitional housing, which is really needed in the community. We struggle with, I believe Carla said it, we can work with these individuals and families, but then we have nowhere to put them once they've succeeded in the program. And so it may not impact Comia directly unless we were to build additional, like I said, emergency services, but it would certainly impact where we can move these individuals and families to once they've successfully completed a program. We end up keeping people in shelter far longer than what they need to be. And it's not, I mean, I love Comia and I love what we do, but it's not a good environment for families to permanently live there. It's not a place for individuals to permanently become, their home. And so having this next step is really critical in our citizens becoming successful.
Yeah, I want to kind of piggyback off what Robin said. We do the mostly the transitional piece for them, and even we have our limits as far as what transitional housing that we have. And as of lately, our waiting list for that transitional housing just keeps growing. A lot of difficulties that we're finding with our programs is, yes, we get them in the transitional housing, but now we got to try and find them permanent housing. Well, Laramie County has become a very difficult place to find a place to live. I was just explaining to Robin or talking to Robin here and Michelle, and we were talking about, someone who's got an really good credit background check and really good rental history is having a hard time finding housing. You can most of the population that we serve doesn't have that kind of background check and stuff like that. So landlords are starting to be a little more pickier as far as what they're getting in for housing. And of course, rent has gone up because of the inflation and because of jobs bringing more people in. We are seeing a lot more difficulty in getting any type of housing at this point. We wholly rely on voucher services like HUD-VASH, Shallow Subsidy, Cheyenne Housing Authority, and a lot of the landlords are either choosing not to accept those, or they're not, or they don't need to accept them because they got somebody who's got a full-time job they can pay more rent than what the voucher allows. So what we would want to see with this is we want to see more available affordable housing as well, something that will not exceed the price of a voucher, or will not exceed the price of somebody who doesn't make above the poverty above the poverty limit. That way our programs can be more effective for those who get into housing and become more self-sufficient.
I'm also going to piggyback off of these two. We, our programs deal just with veterans where, Robin and Eric have everyone, but we have veterans that have no credit, bad credit, criminal histories, things that they have paid for in their past that are still coming up to haunt them now. I literally just paid a $2,000 deposit on a 1-bedroom apartment for a veteran. I was shocked, but I had to get him housed. He is on disability. He gets $843 a month. So he's going to be with us for quite some time because he doesn't have the funds to continue to pay his rent. He can only pay a portion of it. And then if they don't qualify for VASH, we have to figure out how we're going to get this gentleman to pay his rent, as well as, the 40 or 50 other veterans that we have on our caseloads. I think that a housing summit and having additional funds for these men and women that are on the streets it's really important.
So I'm going to reiterate that we do need more transitional housing there. And exactly what they're talking about. You don't become homeless and have good credit. And we've been asked a few times in the last couple of weeks, which is shocking to me, if we would co-sign the lease for these people. Well, we're not big enough to be able to afford to do that. So if we had the trust, maybe that would be a way where we could have an element to co-sign those leases for the people who are working on their credit. And what I've read, that a lot of times there's a homeless part to the trust. Obviously that would directly affect us because the more funds we have, the more people we can help.
So I believe as a community and as a county, we really rock emergency shelter. That part, I think, as a community, we really do. We have the beds, we have the services, we provide great services to those victims and homeless people that need a bed to sleep in. And as a community, we also have some really great landlords out there. But what we're missing is that in-between piece, because we can't go from sleeping in a shelter to a $1,400 apartment without some assistance. And so that's what I'm hoping for, is someplace in between, someplace we can start building an in-between piece for those people that really need our help.
For Habitat, it would allow us easier access to funding to purchase properties to rehabilitate, to put families in. It would help us acquire land to build affordable housing on. And to these, our panelists' points as well, the transitional housing is there, or it needs to be there. And the next step needs to be there as well. So having a housing trust fund would allow us to help that continue by moving people from the transitional housing into safe and affordable housing as well.
My apologies to the room. So access to funding, absolutely. And if the statewide housing trust fund is structured in such a way that it supports feeding a local housing trust fund that would allow each community to serve local needs under local control, and kind of reduce that onerous piece that can be sometimes associated with federal funding. That is the best way to maximize those funds. We also employ a HUD certified housing counselor and have some pretty significant financial literacy programs under our umbrella, and having access to funding for those, which is and access to operational funds, which a lot of the funding sources don't offer. That would be a game changer for us, and which in turn means that we as nonprofit developers would be able to be a game changer for our community, moving that needle on affordable housing. Again, as a nonprofit developer, really what we saw, particularly at the height of the recent housing volatility, is that a good chunk of land to build some houses on was about $85,000 to $150,000. So if you couple that with the cost of labor and the cost of supplies, and then also reduce the amount of funds that our homeowners have available to buy a home, there's really no way to build affordable housing without some significant subsidy, right? So for us, that subsidy often means getting very creative. We actually have a community land trust model, which means the families that purchase their homes own everything above grade, but we retain ownership of the land. In essence, if you don't have to buy the dirt underneath the home, how much more home can you afford? So getting creative with that can certainly help that subsidy piece. Unfortunately, it also means that we have to come up with $85,000 to $150,000 up front, and the value of the land itself doesn't always come up to that when it's assessed. So we have to get creative with land and additional subsidy. So that certainly is a stumbling block. We also have, as mentioned before, that whole access to funding that supports operations. And we, as a nonprofit that has a 7-year program, sometimes the 1-year funding cycles or 2-year funding cycles of many grants or federal programs doesn't necessarily support the entire success that we know it takes for us to have a 98% success rate.
Yeah, I will reiterate, access to funding is a big barrier. To illustrate that point, we have some land that was donated to us generously by Leaning Tree Homes. It's just under an acre, but it is not connected to the city sewer or water. And so for infrastructure to get us going so we can build, we need north of $1 million just in infrastructure costs before we can start developing affordable housing. A housing trust fund could help us get more of that funding in an easier and more accessible way. Land is a barrier right now, the cost of it, and also lack of land, right? And this is why we need to look at zoning changes, which we'll discuss a little earlier or later, and start building up instead of out. And that can be a big barrier for a lot of our problems right now as well.
So I'm just gonna grab onto Dan's because our clients that we work with are a long ways away from being able to move into that house or get their own property or get their own house. So our barriers are a little more significantly in the area of like getting them sober, making sure that they have a job, make sure that they have a safe place to go to. So we work on that piece, but we need to give them hope, and we need to be able to say, if you do all of this and you work forward, and Dan's going to help you get into a house. I mean, those are the things that we need. So we really need to give our clients some hope.
That's a good point, Carla. Hope is very important along with the financial ability to find them housing. That's the biggest barrier, which we are all here because of that, is we need affordable housing. That's our barrier. We need somewhere for them to go once they complete the program.
Because VOA works with our property managers, I don't know that we actually have a barrier to increase affordable housing, other than we need our property managers to work with us and not feel like they're going to get robbed if they're working with Volunteers of America or HUD-VASH, or somebody that's going to guarantee that their rent is going to get paid, because essentially our veterans are going to not have our help, and our property managers just want to guarantee that they're still going to get paid and not have to evict somebody again.
I agree with Michelle as well as the rest of the panel here. The big thing you're hearing is funding availability. A good example of this, we do own a plot of land and we aren't currently doing anything with it except mowing it every other week. We just had Dan and his team work on our veterans deck, which we got a quote for just wood and building of it last year for about I think it was about $3,000 or $4,000, and then it was 16, wasn't it? Yeah, 16. Sorry. And then we had to get another quote here, and maybe 4 or 5 months later, and it went up to $32,000. And that was just for the price of wood and labor. So it's definitely finding something more, or the funding availability, because we're not able to match what the inflation is costing to get the materials or get stuff to even build housing. So we're right there with Dan, and then we're also right there with Michelle, is getting private managers and landlords on the same page as the programs that we're working with, knowing that, hey, these guys, yes, they had a past, or they had something that affected them in the past, but yet they paid for it. We need more work with you, and we've had a couple great landlords that have done that for us, but I think there needs to be more education out there as far as what the different housing programs have to offer and how it would enhance the landlord's contribution to the community, as well as getting these guys off the streets and into permanent housing, giving them that chance.
This is a really tough question for me to answer. Much like Carla, our response is, or our issues are very personal. I have not met a family yet that we've served that I would feel comfortable referring directly to Brenda or Habitat. They couldn't own a home. They couldn't take care of it. And the best way to explain this is I'm going to give you an example. So in April, we acquired the Stagecoach Motel. When we were gifted this motel, we were asked not to create any new homelessness. So please don't evict any of these folks without cause and try and relocate them to another home. So I immediately met with everyone, and particularly there was one family that had 2 young children, and the Stagecoach Motel was not an adequate place for a family with children. So mom, dad, a little 3-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl, a dog and a cat were living in a 1-room hotel room. We met with them initially and said, okay, you guys, you're going to have to find another place to move to, utilize our caseworkers. We encourage them to sign up with Cheyenne Housing Authority, looking into the ERAP program. We couldn't get these parents to really respond. They wouldn't engage. We constantly had to go over to the hotel and knock on the door and ask them things. And we were constantly met with, I don't know how to do that. I can't do that. Well, dad is a special needs individual with a low IQ. Mom has a plethora of mental illnesses, anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, and they're raising these 2 beautiful children. Now, one of my staff said, we need to report them to DFS. Well, I've worked with DFS. I'm a licensed foster parent. You don't take kids away because their parents have issues. These parents love their children. Their children were fed. They had a roof over their head. Granted, they weren't always clean. Their toys were broken. Their clothes were dirty. The unit was an absolute disaster. It smelled like cat urine and there was trash everywhere. So finally, after several months of the family not engaging and not doing anything, I finally filed a formal eviction notice to try and get their attention. Gave them 30 days to leave the unit. And so when the parents came to me upset, I said, listen, you guys, school's going to start and your kiddos, are still living in a motel. We need to move quickly. We need to do something. We're willing to help you, but I need you to tell me, where do you want to go? So mom says, well, we're going to move to a motel in Laramie. And I said, you're moving to another motel. Let's put your family in an apartment. There's services, there's money to help with this. They have been living in motels for 11 years. They don't know how to live anywhere else. They didn't want to part with their animals. We offered them our Journey Center for Families, but dad would have to stop drinking and the pets would have to go to the animal shelter. They refused all of that. So I started bringing boxes over to them so they could start packing. The morning that they were supposed to move to Laramie, mom says, well, we don't have the rent money. We spent it. We haven't started packing yet. So my staff went over there and in 2 hours packed up everything they had, loaded it on the trailer. We paid their first month's rent in Laramie and moved them to this motel. Now I felt really bad because I thought we're just taking this poor family and dumping them off in another motel. So now there's somebody else's problem. But there's nothing for them here. They don't know how to engage in the services. And when I went into that unit and saw how disgusting it was, I didn't think, oh, these awful lazy people. What I thought was, this is what mental illness looks like. This is what poverty and lack of skills looks like. These people don't mean to be like this. They don't know how to be any different. And so we have to provide them with the services that are going to help them become healthy. And maybe they can't do it on their own. So they need to have lifetime case management. But we can't look at these folks as though they're throwaway families. I don't even know how to begin looking at affordable housing for a family like that because it's out of their realm of reality. And so I don't know how to answer that question.
You're answering the first one.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Would you like me to read the question? Okay. What is my experience, if any, with accessing programs such as HOME, CDBG, or the National Housing Trust Fund program? I will speak to CDBG. That's what I have the most experience with. And my experience is it's really, really difficult. When I first came to the Camilla shelter, we were trying to apply for CDBG funds, which are federal funds, but they're filtered through the city. And we need this program for building improvements. That's what we use it for. And we were getting money for quite a few years. And then all of a sudden there became this noise issue that we were located on a 4-lane road, which is Lincoln Way, and we had a railroad track behind us. Therefore, the mathematical calculations that HUD uses says that we're over the allowable noise decibels inside our building. So as long as no one's sleeping or studying, we're fine. Well, we're a homeless shelter, people sleep. So we were denied funding. We went to the HUD folks in Denver and said, listen, what are we going to tell us what to do and we'll fix it? Well, we don't know what to do. You just have to make an effort. Try putting up a fence, try, putting in new windows. Well, we had new windows. It's a cement building. So then we wrote the grant to put up the fence and that was denied. Just a number of issues. We finally ended up spending $160,000 of money from our community that people donated, private donations that we had to raise to put up a fence. There's just too many silly regulations in the way. Do you really think someone who's homeless cares that the train goes by? After being there for 30 years, they don't even notice it. I feel as though we oftentimes make it so difficult to give this funding away because we're so worried that we're not crossing T's and dotting I's. And I've also tried asking for forgiveness and not permission, and that doesn't work very well either, not in today's world. There's just too many people, that are in charge of those regulations that come back and make you follow the rules. And so there's no way around it except changing the rules.
So we don't really deal with any of those grants in particular, but we do have our transitional housing. Most of our housing is funded through the WCDA program, as well as our CSBG program, which that funds our Project Hope. But we really don't have any experience with these ones.
Volunteers of America also does not have any experience with these funds.
So Family Promise has used CDBG money to buy our current shelter. And I wasn't there yet, but my board said that getting the grant was pretty easy, but finding a property that the federal government would approve of was not. So we found a building and the building was fine, but the parking lot was in the flood zone, so they denied it. So we had similar experiences as Robin, but they did want me to let you know, all the CDBG people in Cheyenne are very wonderful to work with.
So Safe House also has only really had any dealings with is the CDBG money. And prior to Mayor Collins, we did have some difficult moments. And I will say that has changed for us. We were able to purchase a fence because, like Robin, Safe House sits up alongside a noisy place. Our decibels exceeded 92 or something like that. But that was on the outside. The inside, you couldn't hear anything. So there seemed to be some difficulty there, but we were successful recently, and we will be building a fence to try to take care of some of those decibel issues and the noise, because we want our clients to feel like they can go outside and take their kids out to play and not be listening to all the noise. The other thing that we do, the only experience we have is we have a grant through the Office of Violence Against Women. It's a federal grant, which lets us help with a little bit of transitional housing funds. Our biggest problem with that is finding a place that will accept it and will work with us, because it is a transitional program where when we put a family into the program, the first 4 months we pay 100% of their rent up to $1,000. The next 4 months we pay 2/3 of their rent. In the final 4 months, we pay 1/3 of their rent, transitioning them into being able to pay their own. But again, our biggest hurdle with that program is we can only really service about 10 to 12 families a year, and finding them a place to live is really difficult.
I will echo what Missy said. Usually getting the CDBG grant is the easy part. Spending it is the hard part. A couple examples of that. We have a grant right now through CDBG for the purchase and rehabilitation of a property. And this isn't necessarily CDBG making it hard, but this is to illustrate the current market we are in. We have $198,000 with this grant. And we've had it for a year now, and we have still are trying to find something that we can use those funds to purchase and rehabilitate. For example, several months ago, there was a property condemned by the city, listed for $160,000, and it was gone off the market in 3 days. So theoretically, if we were to purchase that condemned property, our remaining funds would touch nowhere near what it would take to get that livable. So that's one problem with where we are right now. Secondly, we use CDBG funding for our repairs program, which is helpful, and we do use it, but there's a lot of hoops to jump through. And the contractors we use have to be registered in SAM.gov, which is a federal program that allows people to receive federal funds. And it's hard to find contractors who are registered in SAM.gov. So it's a struggle for us, and we don't help as many people as we could if those restrictions weren't there.
So we have, as nonprofit developers, looked at home and have actually looked at the timeline on that. And the home funds are HUD funds that come as federal as a pass through WCDA. When we prepare homeowners, it takes us 2 years to get homeowners prepared and ready to purchase a home. And we don't exactly know if it's going to be 18 to 24 months before they're ready. We don't know if we're going to be able to recruit families that are going to want to purchase the home we build. It all has to do with timeline. It's very hard to use those funds. And in addition, it turns out to be a moot point because yesterday we found out the WCDA will no longer support under home funds under their new plan, single family purchase. It will all only be rental. So that's a big issue. The other thing is that a certified CHODO, community housing development organization organized under WCDA, we have to build so many homes to keep that status and sell them within a certain period of time. But if they're not supporting that through home funds, it creates a system where we can in no way continue to be a community housing development organization unless we take on the rental piece, which we may at some point, but in order to comply with that, we have to completely change our mission and model in order to access those funds. CDBG here in Cheyenne is an entitlement city, which means that they are given their own issue of CDBG funds. The rest of the CDBG funds for the state now go through WCDA. And for us, it was a learning process. And I think we worked in partnership with the city to really figure out a lot of issues with that. And we currently do have a project that is hopefully going to be funded if we can figure out this last hurdle that was thrown our way. So that's our experience with those funds. I think I can read. So the question is, what changes or solutions would you like to see to create better access to affordable housing? The changes that I would like to see is, of course, a statewide housing trust fund that then is able to trickle down to local housing trust funds around the state that would be available, that would serve the needs for local control. I also would love to see that opened up, and perhaps using some ARPA funding to get it funded would be very, very helpful. I also would like to see our legislative body consider the idea for land banking, which interestingly enough does not have a fiscal note. It is simply enabling legislation that allows communities to have interagency agreements that allow land banking. That is certainly a big option for us. I think the stories that come to mind is when I think about what our families faced in the most recent volatile market over the course of the pandemic. When interest rates were at their lowest, we would have families who have been working for 2.5 years to save their down payment, improve their credit scores. They even look at career planning, education. I know that LCCC is a huge partner for us and really looking at getting families ready to go. What we saw is that our families would get so excited. They found a home. They found one that they're non-negotiables. There were some non-negotiables that had to be negotiated, but they kind of found something that would work. They got so excited and they put in an offer, and Kristen Aaron, my family advocate, is here and she can commiserate that they would get outbid by $20,000 in cash every time. And there was just nothing. And they would get so discouraged after all the work they'd done. They just felt like, well, what's the point? And for us, we actually are seeing our homeowners have a better chance with even with increased or growing interest rates because there's simply more inventory on the market. So they don't have to negotiate on their non-negotiables necessarily as much. They just take a little longer to save the money that they need. But if they had a house that in 5 years, if they put a lot of money into and they put a lot of sweat equity into, it might be kind of what they needed, but they had to come up with that money up front. Or now with an increased interest rate, they don't have to compromise on the non-negotiables. They get to keep what, or they get to do what, have the house that will serve their needs, and they get to spread it out over 30 years. We actually are seeing an increase in home ownership opportunities.
I will echo what Brenda says as far as changes or solutions. State Housing Trust Fund, local housing trust fund, but what that really means to me is an investment from our government and our community. Cities and states across the nation are investing in housing, and to Mayor Collins' opening remarks about economic benefits, affordable housing is economic development. And you have local examples. For instance, the city of Sheridan recently designated $1.3 million of their ARPA funding to start to look at creating a community land trust, which would benefit affordable housing and benefit their communities. I just recently learned the state of Nevada has recently made a $500 million investment in housing for their state. So the changes and solutions need to come from our leaders and our community stakeholders so we can move forward with our housing issues. And as far as the story, my first thought is when we get a repairs application or an ERAP HSS application, we have to prioritize what they need because we don't have the funding to do everything that they may need. And so with access to better funding through a housing trust fund, we would be able to help more people, help them solve their housing issues and stay safely in their homes.
So I really like sitting next to Dan because he's talking all at the very top of this chain and some great things for the state and the community. And then I get to be Debbie Downer and talk about the very bottom piece. I have a client right now that has 3 kiddos. She actually has a decent job. She has something that can help her once, but she was left with nothing but the clothes that her and her kids were able to walk out the door with. That's it, nothing more. A broke down car and the clothes that they left with. She started applying for rentals. Every place she went was a $35 rental fee. And so, application fee. So after she applied at 4 different apartments, she spent $170 or $140. I'll do the math. Pretty quickly. Right there, she's already used a lot of what she had saved aside. And recently she found a place and she applied for ERAP. She got approved for ERAP, but ERAP takes 6 weeks or so before your landlord gets the money. And the landlord said, I just can't wait 6 weeks. So you've got to pay your first month's rent and your damage deposit up front, and then I'll take your ERAP for the next few months. So then we struggled to help her find that because it was imperative to her to be in a place before kids start school. She just could not see herself sending her kids on the bus from a shelter. And that was important to her. And that's what we are working on right now. So like I said, we're more the meat and potatoes down here, and Dan's our high hopes. And a lot of people here is the same thing. And that's what I'm hoping for.
So I feel like maybe one of our clients was having a really rough time. She was not low income, but she did not make the 3 times the rent. So she had this little tiny section of housing, and she actually told me, why can't there be a cap on rent? So maybe with this trust, they could do incentives to keep the rents lower. Because that's where we're having the problem, is finding a rent they can afford if they aren't low housing. and then the low housing is full. So that's where, what I would change is maybe an incentive to keep the rents low. Tax break, something.
So a lot of our veterans have service animals. And we have been paying double rent for the already increased rent. I just got a house for one of my ladies that's had a service animal for gosh, probably 15 years. And not only is her rent $1,200 a month, but she also has to pay $400 a month for her dog. It's a service animal. It's a service animal. She needs this dog to live. And so now she has to pay an extra $400 a month, and she doesn't make the money to pay her rent and her dog's rent. So I think that there just needs to be a lot of education, especially with service animals, so that our veterans, any of our homeless individuals that have service animals, don't have to pay an extra amount of rent because they have an animal that provides a service to them.
Well, they took all the good answers. I do like the kind of the cushioning thing that we were talking about, Misty. Especially because most of the people that we serve, it do have the really extensive background checks, you know, and they've worked on it. And right now some of them that we serve are actually pretty good pillars of our community, but they just can't get into a place because of things that they did in their past on their background. And like Michelle said, a lot of landlords are negotiating, okay, so we'll take them, but we want a double deposit. Of course, VOA has been able to do that, but programs like ours that are funded through CSBG, we only got so much money. That's not something we can do. So having a fund to be able to kind of help with that, to try and alleviate, you know, we understand the landlord's perspective because they're trying to run a business, because we're also, I mean, we're landlords ourselves, but we also need to understand the perspective of who we're serving. And in this particular case with the person I'm talking about, who's a kind of a pillar in our community right now, doing very well, trying to work, trying to do everything he can, but he and his spouse had broken up, and it left him a lot of debt in his background, which of course he was the only one responsible for. So we're not able to get him into a place because there's just nothing there. So being able to maybe have funds to kind of cushion that and help them get into housing and build up a more promising relationship with more landlords to help with that would definitely be something I would like to see.
Phew, I'm all over the place on this question. I'm going to start kind of when Dan mentioned it takes an investment from our city, county, and state. That is such a true statement. And so I'm going to kind of draw attention to our mayor. For the first time in the 40 years that Camilla has been in operations, a city official stepped forward and put a substantial amount of money towards homelessness. Mayor Collins had this ARPA money, and he wanted to spend it the best way possible. So he advocated to both the city and the county to come up with money to get rid of a crappy hotel that had human trafficking, drug use, you name it, and to give it to a nonprofit. Bravo. We were so excited. But it kind of stopped there. The city did what they needed to do. They gave a substantial amount of money, but we also need the state to start realizing that homelessness belongs in every community as far as where the solutions come from. For years and years, Camilla has relied on private individuals to make donations, and that's what we've lived on. You know, we write some grants, but it's really the people in our community that pay the bills for Camilla. Well, now that we have 3 properties, our budget is up over $1 million. We can't rely on our community members to just be generous for that amount of money. We cannot afford to run 3 buildings with private donations. People are tapped out. people are, you know, the economy with the way it is, inflation, the cost of housing, gas, you name it, people are not giving donations anymore. Discretionary money is hard to come by. You talk to any nonprofit here, they'll probably tell you their donations are down. We need to have a better system of how to maintain these programs or they won't be there. So then to move on to what Carla said, it's hard for us to get excited about affordable housing because our clients aren't even at a state where they could take care of housing, and probably more so at Camilla than at Safe House. Our folks are homeless. You know, the ones that lost their job, broken relationship, they just need a few months to save up their money and get back out there. Okay, they have to find a place to live. But then we're talking about the ones who are the chronic, which is what the Stagecoach is going to be serving. These folks that are living under the bridges, who are mentally ill, untreated, substance users. I have a guy right now who falls into that category. He's a veteran, but he wasn't in the military long enough to qualify for a lot of benefits. He's been a meth user since he left the Navy, and he's 54 years old. So most of his life, he's been a drug user. He is begging for treatment. He's begging for help to get over his addiction. We're keeping him at the shelter. We let him stay in during the day and we put him to work volunteering around the building. He's got 40 days clean on his own, but that's not going to do him any good if we put him in an apartment. He needs the treatment. He needs the skills to keep that sobriety. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of all these supportive services that need to come along before we can put these folks into this housing, because they will fail. If we create housing and stuff people in them, they're going to destroy the housing. They're not going to take care of it. The landlords aren't going to rent to them. And it's this vicious cycle where people are not, they're just not going to stay where they're at. Okay, don't get mad at me, Mayor Collins. But you know, when we opened up our Journey Center for Families, we've got our main shelter, and now we've got this new program. I really wish that nonprofits could be excluded from a lot of the codes and the expectations that the city has. We were gifted this building. We're working on remodeling it, and I've already spent over $5,000 just in fees for turning in a site plan. You know, our bill to our what do you call it? To design the site plan, that was $12,000. You know, so we're spending all this money to have all of these things done just to change a motel into a shelter. And I understand the city can't just say, oh, okay, you don't have to do it. But then let's change the rules. Let's change the policies, because as nonprofits, we're paying the same fees and the same high expenses that a for-profit business is doing. And we don't have the money. I mean, I'm going to spend $20,000 before we're even getting anywhere. And, you know, that Stagecoach motel, it was free for us. So it was a gift. Don't get me wrong, but we're going to spend another $1 million rehabbing it to get it up to code and to put the things into it that need to be there. So when it's done, it's going to be awesome. But getting there is going to be really hard. And so my recommendation is that, and if for-profit businesses complain, then you just tell them, well, you know, too bad. These are nonprofits. So we got a separate set of rules for them. I have no problem telling somebody this doesn't apply to you. So.
This one's kind of a hard question for us to answer because I haven't dealt with this. But I guess if it was anything, it was just the affordability, which is why we have the empty plot that only gets mowed every other week. I think if things were a little more accessible and not as expensive, we could probably do more with it. We are definitely reaching out to community partners to try and figure that out. We're always in talks with Dan over here about what the possibilities are, but really it's still only but pipe dreams right now. So.
I don't think that the zoning affects the VOA as much as it affects everybody else. We depend on Brenda and Dan and Carla, Family Promise, sorry, and Eric and Robin for our veterans that we serve. Because if there's a situation that we can't get someone into housing right away, you know, we depend on everybody. We depend on our community partners. We depend on our landlords. So I don't think that zoning really affects us as much as them.
As of now, we haven't really had to deal with any zoning, so I don't have any need to change anything.
I'll be very honest. If there's a zoning issue, I have board members that I just call and make them take care of it because it is a little bit over my head. I've never lived in town. I've always lived in the country, and so nobody tells me what to do. So, with that being, I do know that it is an issue. It has been, but fortunately for Safe House, I do have some great board members, and they usually just take care of my problems.
So I'll answer for you guys if that's okay for one thing. One change that needs to happen is to make it easier to zone and build transitional housing. When you have single family zoning or multifamily zoning or certain zones that just don't allow for transitional housing, that needs to change because we've heard from our friends here, transitional housing is a need. They need someplace to put the people in their programs, and there's just not that need right now. And if we look at our zoning codes and say, what can we change to make it easier to develop and build transitional housing? That's something that we can do as a community to make that happen. Me personally, if there's only, I could talk for the next 20 minutes about zoning. Mostly thank you to Seth Lloyd at the city. So, but if I just had to mention one thing, my change would be to eliminate single family zoning, single family only zoning. And I know the city has done a lot of steps to go towards that direction. But the reason behind that is single family zoning was used to segregate our communities through the racist covenants that were put in those developments, and disallowing people of color and low incomes to move into nicer single family neighborhoods. It also, single family zoning also creates NIMBYism, or not in my backyard. So when someone wants to put a multifamily unit in a single family zone, they have to go through the planning process. They have to get it replatted. They have this whole ordeal, and it gives people the opportunity to step forward and say, I don't want that in my backyard. I don't want a multifamily unit next to me. And it creates issues, and it creates barriers to get more affordable housing built. I'll quote one of my favorite nonprofit leaders that I've come to know about in the last year. His name is David Dworkin at the National Housing Conference. And he says, if you don't want affordable housing in your backyard, you're going to have homeless in your front yard. So that was the one change I would make.
So sometimes it's not necessarily about the zoning, but it's the process of going through meeting zoning. And I will kind of echo a little bit of what Robin said. So we currently have a project where going through the process means that if you change the use of a building, that triggers a site plan, which triggers a landscape plan, which triggers a drainage plan, which for anybody who wears 50 hats a day for nonprofit leadership, as we all do, that can be very daunting. So you know, kind of along with Carla, I have a wonderful board, and I do have some talent on my board who is helping me with that. But say, for example, it took us 3 years to come up with $410,000 to purchase the building. But now through the investigation of a site plan, we find that we also need a 5-foot detached sidewalk with a tree boulevard, which will not meet the curb sidewalk of the neighbor. We'll have to do a little jog over, and may require that we rip out a well-established and beautiful tree berm in order to put the tree boulevard in that's required. So sometimes I think it's not, and I think as we work through the process, these things will eventually get worked out. I have to say that everybody involved has been incredibly helpful. But the process is labor intensive, it's time consuming, and I'm not sure it makes good sense to spend time talking about ripping out an established tree berm in order to put in new plantings for a tree boulevard. So that definitely would be the process, not necessarily the zoning. The other thing that I would say is that it's also a philosophy about zoning, and I think that as we look at this housing continuum, I think it's important to remember that it's not necessarily just homeless or those that in danger of being homeless. We absolutely need to address that, but we also need to address that next piece and how we move people forward and how we break that generational poverty cycle. So I think bearing that in mind and having a philosophy on how we interpret that UDC is important.
So that's all the prepared questions that we have. Let's look to the audience now, and then we'll look to the virtual audience in a second. What questions do you have for members of the panel? If you raise your hand, I don't know if we can get you a microphone, or I'll try to repeat what question you have and let us know who you want to answer that on the panel. Yes, sir. The question from the for folks online, the question, Councilman Martinez, did I get that right? Asked about the ability to access federal land that's leased to a municipality for housing projects. I don't have an answer, but I'll add in a little bit more. I think what we found even here locally in Laramie County is there are little enclaves of state property, as well as property that was previously dedicated for parks and open space that hasn't been developed for a variety of reasons to manage that. But I don't know, do any of the panelists want to take a stab at, I'm going to look to the right here to see the creative use of federal and state and other lands for housing?
I think between Dan and I, we have a pretty good inkling that those lands are probably held for very specific purposes, and they're probably held legally by statute as to how they can be used. And my guess is also that the federal government, much like the state, they tend to make revenue off of either recreation or grazing or whatever that is in order to support other things, would be my guess.
Great question. Other questions? Anything online? Yeah, Pat. No questions. Pat, please. So to repeat the question from Mr. Ashworth, so the question is, what are the biggest barriers that help the panelist clientele sort of move to the next level, whether that's from emergency shelter to transitional housing to subsidized housing, subsidized housing into the American dream of owning your own home? Who wants to take that question? Start here.
I think the biggest barrier with us is availability. Availability of low income housing, availability of transitional housing, just the availability of getting to that point. We see a lot of when they start with our program, we see a lot of them that have income issues, but we we do if there's something we do very well is we try to accomplish that barrier by attaching them to or referring them to community programs. If it's income or employment, workforce services, express employment, just anything we can. Yeah, getting attached to disability. We use Michelle a lot for her SOAR, being a SOAR rep herself. We're training SOAR reps in our organization as well. So we're seeing a lot more push with the income, and it seems like they're more willing to increase their income. It's just not enough to meet our media area income standards to get into permanent housing, which has grown exponentially since even last year.
So if you were to walk into the Camilla shelter today, you would think we were a nursing home. You are going to see a number of people on oxygen, with walkers, in wheelchairs, with missing limbs. But these are people that are in their 50s. These are people that, suffer from major medical problems, but they're not old enough to get Social Security, or there's no assisted living that they can afford, because assisted living is more of a private business. And so even if we had affordable housing, they need assistance. And so we currently have two populations of challenge. We have these older folks that are probably younger than me, but incapable of physically taking care of themselves. They need assistance, but they don't have an income adequate to pay for that. And then we have a population of very young people in their, 18 to 25, who struggle with a work ethic. They are very entitled. They are lazy. They don't see the responsibility they have. They still want to live with their parents. And when their parents kicked them out of the house and they became homeless, they couldn't figure out what they were supposed to do. So we have these two pockets, the very young and the very old, who are struggling. And then the in-between are the ones that are out going to work and could get into housing if they had affordable housing. But access to healthcare and mental health care are probably those big barriers, because those folks don't have the services to get well.
So really quickly, accessibility to that housing is really, that is probably one of the biggest barriers. But another barrier that we are finding is because there's a lack of housing, lack of affordable housing, we have people who, landlords who can be picky. And so when some of our clients have been looking for places, they have to have a credit score of 700 to be able to apply. They don't have that. They don't, they just don't. Their credit's been shot. So some of the requirements that our landlords are requesting or are demanding is just way too hard for them to do.
And very quickly, I will add that wages are a barrier right now as well. You have a lot of people and a lot of families struggling, working 2-3 jobs to make ends meet. And by having to do that, it also causes other problems that we see where they may end up needing services and help. So
Our clients also have, of course, affordable childcare issues when they are working shift work and lower paying jobs. Sometimes that can really be a barrier. When we have our classes for our families, we do provide meals and childcare on site, because we don't want that to be one additional barrier, but it is a barrier. The question is, how do nonprofits work together? And if I could give a shout out to Dan and his crew, AMD Bank here in Cheyenne was kind enough during their remodel to see that many nonprofits got some of the furniture that they were upgrading. And we were able to have the Habitat Restore folks come over and move our furniture because there's just us three girls and we couldn't manage 5 great big desks and 3 credenzas. So huge shout out. But there are all different kinds of things. We also do financial literacy and some of those things for our partners. So
And very quickly, once a month, we as a group meet the first Tuesday of every month and as a homeless collaborative, and we talk about these issues and what we can do and what we can help each other with. And everybody at this table sees each other that every day, every month, and then often in between. Oh, yeah. So the United Way asked this year for a collaborative approach, and all of us who deal with homelessness collaborated together to apply for that grant, and we are working together as a collaborative to provide services to the homeless in Laramie County.
Other questions that you want to, we got.
My name is Patrice Gapin. I'm on the CDGB board, but I'm not representing them right now, so get that clear. I'm a landlord for 40 years. I have Cheyenne housing tenants. I have a VASH tenant, and I have stories. My VASH tenant, who's I've had about 4 years, decided to paint the kitchen. He slobbered paint on the stove, which caught fire. He got it on the dishwasher. He painted the faucet, the countertops, the linoleum. So that $2,000 a month that or deposit that you just paid, that ain't covering it. The other thing that you guys don't realize is, like, I have a fourplex and say it's worth 400 or 500, 700,000, depending on the inflation. You guys aren't compensating me for that risk. I have a $250 late fee. I just was at a ERAP meeting. I can't afford to wait 6, 8, 12 weeks for you guys to get your act together, do the application, get it approved, get me approved, notify me by email, or maybe not. I can't afford that. I happen to be an Agent Orange widow, and I'm very attuned to the VA needs, but you guys are very one-sided. We're all talking about needs and not solutions. Part of your solutions is you guys need a builder and a contractor on every one of your boards. Because, like, I just bought a dump. It is a dump on the west side. It's been vacant for 10 years. It has 3 different kinds of wiring, cloth wrapped, asbestos wrapped, some newer stuff. It all has to be taken out. We've got asbestos siding that I've had removed. I had estimates anywhere from $3,000 to $25,000 for that. You guys, you're wanting to cut into my income when you want rent caps, when you want me to put my house at risk for your tenant who might tear it up. I mean, if they just get angry and break the sink off the wall and flood the other 2 apartments, $2,000 ain't cutting it. So you guys need to have an affordable housing program. Yes, we need housing, but we need to reduce some of the zonings for people like me that are coming in and taking care of these derelicts. You need to help me with zoning that I don't have to put in a sprinkler system. And having vegetation, Mayor, having vegetation and trees and shrubs required in a time when we're on water rationing makes no sense. Gee, I just got called and said I've been watering too much from the water board. So, and this lady tells me I'm out of time, but yes, I mean, it's a dilemma, and there's a whole bunch of little tiny things that could be fixed and eased if you want builders to come in, but please recognize our risk.
I'm Dr. Michelle Aldrich, and I serve on the Cheyenne City Council, and I also serve as a city council representative, CDBG. I know this is a tough topic. My husband works with VA, with Veterans Administration, doing HUD-VASH as the administrator. And I know this is a tough topic. I live this topic. I've worked with this population for a long time as a teacher at our alternative school. But what I want you guys to know is I so appreciate what you do every single day, because there are people in our community that rely on your services. And what you bring to the table, we could not pay you enough for what you do and the people that lives you're changing. And we know that home ownership changes lives. Research shows it, it bears it out, and that makes it what a community is made of. So on behalf of the Cheyenne City Council, and I'm sure on behalf of our mayor, we appreciate what you do every single day. Keep up the good work and keep up the good fight, because it's not easy, and we're glad that you're on the front lines doing it.
So I echo that. Thank you for what you're doing. And we've got some discussion going. So I appreciate that we're talking about using this money for capacity building for transitional housing. I think kind of that will help ease the tension for me right now is that what is the desired end state for the person outside of the county, city, nonprofit level? What's the desired end state? And it seems to me that this affordable housing is one spoke in the larger wheel of community wellness. So to kind of talk to the fact that, you know, these people are destructive, you know, people experiencing homelessness are destructive or in affordable housing are destructive. How do we work together to get an end state that works for everybody, whether it be through housing nonprofits, whether it be through mental health nonprofits, whatever it be? How do we get that desirable end state for both the person and property management and owners?
So I think we have to be attuned to this is essentially a people issue, and people are messy, both good and bad, right? And I think we have to take into account that we need for-profit builders. We need the market to do what it does. But if the market was going to fix our issues, we might have already seen that resolution in the 1980s. But on a national level, we continue to build fewer houses, and we continue to have more need. And each of those needs, if they're not met, Maslow is not wrong, right? They move into other issues, and they can increase instability both personally and professionally, which lead to a number of really poor health outcomes. So that first level is really your basic needs, right? Shelter, food, safety. And until those are met, hierarchy of need, you will not be able to move from survive to thrive.
And also to your point, Jeremy, I'll add that the State Housing Trust Fund or housing trust funds in general aren't going to solve all the issues we're talking about today, right? It's a piece of the puzzle, and it is going to take community interaction and communities and nonprofits, for-profits, municipalities, everybody working together to solve it. And to your point, the end state would be to improve the lives of our individuals, our neighbors, our friends, and our communities. And there are efforts doing that. The Laramie County Community Partnership has several action teams working right now, one on housing, one on health outcomes, one on homelessness. So these things are, those cooperatives are there. We just need more support.
I'm not very good at quick questions. I'm pretty good at making a short story long, not very good at making a long story short. First, I don't know, how do you get by? I had an issue. We're talking housing. Excuse me, I'm Mayor Joel Highsmith, Shoshone. Even Shoshone, we have housing issues. It's a statewide problem. I mentioned the word affordable housing in a council meeting and about got ran out of town. Because the city, as Cheyenne stepped forward, we stepped forward and bought some derelict buildings, an old motel and an old grocery store, turned into a bait shop, tore them down. But anyway, housing was the main design for that. And probably maybe workforce housing, but we need housing. But they didn't like the word affordable housing in Shoshone, so I don't know if you got ways to get around that. Help me. But and then secondly, the lady that spoke, that's a landlord, that is an issue, that because so much money, especially cost material stuff, damage can be done. A couple $1,000 deposit's really not nothing if, I'm also a landlord on a small scale view, but anyway, I do credit checks and everything because if they tear it up, do they have the ability to pay? I mean, that's an issue. So that's one thing that's, I don't know, how do we address that, or if there's a guarantee from, if it's from the trust or, however this goes, that protect the landlord too, for something like that. Also, city owned, we're probably going to manage our own workforce housing and take on that responsibility ourselves for the town of Shoshone. One thing for smaller towns, like we're a mid-sized town in the state of Wyoming. We're not small, because if you look at the population, we're mid-sized. So that's where most of Wyoming is what people would call small town. But we have issues with having the personnel to address all, if we're involved with WCDA, rural development, meeting all the qualifications, all the paperwork that's piled on us to manage something like that is a real big issue. We have an organization, FCAG, Fremont County Association of Governments, where we're all together. For us, that may be our answer, to work together, where we end up with that group helping us do that. We're looking at options. I got more, but we'll cut it at that. But if any suggestions on anything like that, please feel free.
Response to the good mayor's question, and then over to Ray.
Very quickly, I would encourage you, Mr. Mayor, to absolutely look at that Fremont Collaborative and establishing a local housing trust fund that hopefully will be able to be fed by the statewide housing trust fund. I would also encourage you to do a little wordsmithing on using not affordable housing, but housing affordability, essential worker housing, or wage supported housing.
A great answer and a good conversation. We're about to break to have lunch. As I understand, it'll be a delicious taco bar. And want you to enjoy that time, but it's a time for you to interact and ask questions, reflect on some of the comments. In closing, one of the things that we simply, you'll hear me as a broken record talking about people, whether I refer to that as talent and workforce or individual success, social mobility. People are really at the heart of what we do. And because they are in a short supply, talent is in a short supply, we have to look at every place where we can help develop talent. And so one of the challenges we'll face as we go into the conversation about how you design a housing trust fund is, how do you design that for the greatest need, the greatest number, at what end? What I will tell you is the work that you do, while sometimes maybe for smaller numbers or feel that way, may be considered the greatest need as we think about which population could benefit most from these types of things. So on behalf of everybody in the audience, I certainly want to thank you for your work. Thank you for your time and your comments today. How about a round of applause for our panelists? So as I said, we'll break for lunch now and be able to participate in the taco bar. Sit, eat, mingle, ask questions. We are going to start right back up at 1:15 with the discussion on the Iowa State and Local Housing Trust Fund. So enjoy lunch.